New to this, in pain and seeking advice/support. Deep breath, let's go. It hurts me to be here. It pains me to have to click join on this group. It irritates me that I have to learn all of the acronyms. It pains me to write this, but I am in pain, have no support system, and am unsure what to do next. Here is my tale for anyone who are interested. My wife is 30 years old and I am 31 years old. We started dating in high school about 15 years ago. We got so close. We did everything together and were each other's top priority. We went to school together, learned to drive together, and had our first experiences with college and the workforce. Even though she was 2 classes below me in school, it was never a problem. And even though we attended separate but nearby universities, it was never an issue. I started working at Walmart when I was 19, and she followed a year or 2 later, so we even worked at the same location for a period. We did everything together, including vacations, schooling, day excursions, movies, dating, and shopping. Her parents liked me and I liked them, so they allowed me remain at their home on weekends, in their daughter's room/bed, while I went to college. There were never any major problems. After my 3rd year of college, I just relocated my belongings into their home. I've been living with my wife full-time since 2011, when I was 21 and she was 19. We've certainly experienced our share of setbacks along the road. My wife is the youngest of 3 children, with a 9-year age difference between her and her next oldest brother. Her 2 elder brothers are not particularly successful in their careers, and they often did not communicate with my wife or her parents for extended periods of time. As a result, my wife nearly grew up as the only child, and she was exceptionally intelligent and constantly at the top of her class in high school and college. Because of this, her parents spoiled her with stuff and gave her all of their attention, causing her to become a greedy person. When we were in our teens and early 20s, she also had a lot of jealousy problems, and I was usually dismissive of these sentiments and refused to stop talking to female friends of mine because I thought it wasn't appropriate to let them go. We were eventually able to work over those obstacles, communicate, and become closer together. We got engaged at a Taylor Swift concert in June 2011 and married precisely 2 years later in 2013. On March 1st of this year, we celebrated 15 years of marriage. Our kid was born in 2016 and just started school this autumn. Back in 2014, I was feeling distant from my wife, and maybe a little terrified since I was married so young. I was only 22 when married, 23 at the time of this occurrence, and I started looking for other ladies to chat to online to fulfill my emotional needs. I discovered a female on Craigslist who was searching for her and contacted her. I couldn't physically bring myself to cheat on my wife, so I never met this girl, but we kept in touch through messaging. She had recently arrived in the region when she posted on CL, and she really lived 5 hours away in Buffalo and NY, so I never met her in person. For a few months, we texted virtually every day, and it felt nice to chat to her. I'm not sure whether that would be classified in EA since neither of us wanted to be in a relationship, and our chats were nearly entirely platonic in nature, aside from the occasional prompts that would come from the other girl, which I would dismiss. But since my wife was unaware, it would very certainly be deemed cheating in some way. The girl had no idea I was in a relationship. Long story short, my wife and I took a trip to Buffalo, and this girl wanted to see me while I was there. I refused, and my wife ended up discovering this relationship and calling the girl, who told her the truth that we had never met and our conversations were almost entirely platonic. This helped a little, but my wife was still devastated by it. It didn't help that we were just getting started on our trip. When we eventually returned home, we had probably the deepest and most honest conversation we'd ever had in our entire relationship, 7 years in, and we both revealed we were unhappy in some ways, and my wife had given me a letter in which she hinted she was considering leaving the relationship. We wept together, worked through problems, and things improved. After that episode, I never fully wavered in my devotion. Our son was born in 2016, which completely altered our lives and put a strain on our relationship. We had just had a miscarriage, which had taken a heavy toll on us, but we became pregnant again a few months later, which resulted in the birth of our son. We were both hoping for a daughter, but life is unpredictable. Also, we had been living with my wife's parents since 2011, but they had added an addition to their house in 2012 for her mother, who had overcome cancer but had many long-term side effects that made it difficult for her to walk stairs, etc. So they erected a mother-in-law apartment on the lower level that was linked to the kitchen, and we were granted complete control of the old house. So for the most part, life was really wonderful, if hectic and stressful. We had conflicts because of stress, lack of sleep, time spent at work, and topics we didn't always agree on. To me, it was difficult, but we were always excellent at talking and always worked through the challenges. And we never went to bed angry or had any significant large arguments, maybe one or two when one of us left the room to cool down. I always felt that even though it was difficult at times, we had persevered and endured many challenges while still loving each other, and that we were the gold standard of partnerships. Her parents, like mine, have been married for almost 30 years. My wife's mother died in 2018 as a result of long-term consequences from her cancer treatments, which devastated her. They were extremely close, and we were still living in the two-family with them, and she gradually weakened and was put in at-home hospice till she died. Her and her father were distraught, as was I, for she was like a second mother to me, and I loved her, and our baby grew to adore her throughout the course of his almost 2 years of existence. For reasons I still don't understand, I recognized I couldn't fully give the comfort and support my wife needed in her time of need. I was taught to avoid pain, confrontation, and to hide my feelings. When my wife needed me, all I could do was apologize and touch her leg or arm instead of providing her with the complete comfort she required. This, I believe, constituted the next significant schism in our relationship. It took my wife a long time to mourn and absorb her mother's death, and I still believe she never really recovered properly or in the healthiest manner. We had been house hunting for our first home in the summer of 2020 in the midst of the pandemic, as I had gotten a very good job and finally wanted to spread our wings as a family and get our own house and yard in an area with a nice school district. Her parents' home is not in a great neighborhood, and our son would be going to the same school we had gone to, but it was not great then and has fallen to much lower depths since. While my wife agreed that our kid deserved to attend a better school, she did not want to relocate, pay the money, leave her father who was still mourning and so on, which produced another schism between us. These concerns, along with years after our son's birth of progressively drifting apart emotionally and basically patching things, prompted my wife to advise that we seek a brief separation in the summer of 2020. At the time, I felt she was insane for believing that we couldn't get through these difficulties as we had in the past, and that we just needed to talk things out and work on ourselves. We were both in our 20s and had a youngster to consider. I finally persuaded her to contemplate divorce, and things improved for a time, but I believe we eventually slipped into similar patterns. I see now that I wasn't as affectionate with my wife as I should have been, and although my love language is acts of service, I don't feel like I was completely fulfilling what my wife wanted and what her love language demands were. We eventually put the home search on hold, but in early 2021, I was given a lot better work with a considerably higher pay, but the location was roughly 45 minutes north of our present area. I really contemplated declining since I loved my present employer and my work was straightforward, and I knew this position would be much more hard. My wife eventually convinced me to accept the job, and we now have a considerably greater budget for a home, plus tax rates are at record lows, so everything seems to be perfectly aligned. We bought a home approximately 40 minutes north and plan to relocate in late March 2021. Things were going well in our new house at first. We got a puppy in April, something my wife had wanted for years, but I had always said no, not until we had our own home with a yard. We flew to Connecticut in June so I could purchase her a new vehicle, and throughout the summer we determined she could quit her state job due to the awful commute, and I took on the additional financial load while she settled into her ride-sharing company Uber. However, shortly after the August 2020 episode in which my wife discussed separation, I started to have health problems, which we now feel were mostly driven by stress and worry, and mild depression. Although purchasing a home and relocating helped, I still felt miserable a lot of the time, both physically and psychologically. This harmed our physical and personal connection much more, but we were working through it together. Now comes the difficult part. My wife has been complaining a lot about where we live. Now because it is in a cellular and internet dead zone. It is far from things she is used to. It is far from her father, with whom she is extremely close. And it is difficult for her because she prefers to Uber in the cities where we used to live versus up north where it is much quieter. Throughout March and April, she started performing Uber quests, which require you to take a big number of trips in a short period of time. And in order to meet these objectives, my wife would occasionally sleep at her dad's house since it was too late to go home at 2 a.m. This is very acceptable, and she has done it many times before with me there, so there is no reason to suspect anything. However, this got more often, and she began working more and more, even though we didn't absolutely need the additional money. As a side note, when I first started working as a teen, my wife and I opened our own bank accounts at the same bank, and we opened a joint account that was only used to save for our wedding, but then became our primary household account once we were married. My wife has worked on and off throughout our relationship, but every time she earns money, it goes directly to her old personal account that is linked to the main account, whereas my paychecks always go to the joint account, which is where all of the expenses and bills are paid from. I had no access to her personal account in 15 years, and my account was only used around Christmas to hide the stores and websites from which I made purchases for surprise gifts. I haven't deposited money into that account in at least 3 or 4 years, if not longer. Stay tuned for the next part.